Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift through the air, and I mean that quite literally. Imagine, if you will, the cool breeze flowing through the stone walls of a dark medieval monastery. You can hear the faint rustle of ancient parchment and the low hum of monks whispering to each other. Maybe it's just the wind, or maybe it's the breath of the world itself, carrying secrets. And just as you're getting comfortable, perhaps you should know, you probably won't survive this, at least, not without some deeper understanding of the medieval mind. But don't worry, we're all just passing through this together. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from too, so feel free to drop your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins with something simple yet oddly profound: wind, but not just any wind. This wind holds secrets that are older than the stones of the monastery you lie in. Monks, back in the Middle Ages, weren't just concerned with the wind blowing through the trees or rustling the pages of their holy books. They listened closely. They believed that the air itself could carry messages from God, or worse, messages from something darker. Now, if you think about it, we often consider wind a trivial thing. It's just air moving around. But for these medieval monks, it wasn't so simple. No, to them, the wind was a bearer of all sorts of things: blessings, warnings, and yes, even plagues. It was as if the wind had its own will, its own mind, and for the monks, it was a constant companion, one that would never leave them, no matter how deep into the cloisters they went. Imagine yourself lying in your cot at night. The wind is a constant presence, whispering through the cracks in the stone, moving the very air you breathe. But this isn't just any breeze. This is a wind charged with meaning. The monks, with their finely tuned senses and intense devotion, would pray for signs, hoping the wind would carry messages from heaven. But sometimes they feared the wind wasn't speaking for God at all. Sometimes it carried something far worse. They believed that the wind could be a direct messenger of divine will. It might bring a new blessing, or it might announce the arrival of something far more sinister. In the Middle Ages, the wind was thought to be a reflection of the state of the soul, a very moral wind. If the wind shifted, if it blew too strongly or too faintly, it was taken as a sign. A shift in the air meant a shift in the spiritual realm. And when the plagues came, monks would search the skies, hoping to decipher what the wind was telling them about the fate of humanity. Remember how we talked about those cracks in the monastery walls? Picture them widening just slightly, enough to let the cold air slip through and brush against your skin. It's not just a breeze now, it's a warning. The monks felt it, and so they listened. They believed they could feel the changes in the air, and they would pray harder when the wind grew restless, as if the world itself was trembling in anticipation of something dire. But the wind, as strange as it sounds, wasn't the only thing that monks used to try and understand the coming of the plagues. They also had a much more earthy method of diagnosis. And yes, it involved their noses. Imagine walking through the monastery halls, your nostrils filling with the smell of incense, sweat, and damp stone. The scent of something far worse? Well, that was miasma, the evil air. This was how monks believed disease traveled, through the very air they breathed. And it wasn't just a theory, it was a way of life. Historians still argue about whether medieval people truly understood the science behind what we now call germs, but they definitely had their own version of it. And that's where the wind comes back in. The monks believed that the air itself could be tainted, and they associated this tainted air with sin. A plague didn't just happen because of bad luck. It was a divine punishment, and it could be carried by the wind itself. The foul air wasn't just a byproduct of illness. It was a sign that something had gone terribly wrong in the world. And it wasn't just the plague that these monks feared from the wind. No, the wind could also carry whispers of sin, gossip, and even flatulence. Yes, flatulence. But more on that in a moment. Let's take a moment to breathe, slowly, deeply. That familiar sensation of air filling your lungs, making its way through the passageways of your chest. But what if every breath you took was a sign of impending doom? What if the very air you inhaled was a conduit for something far darker than you could imagine? Well, in the minds of medieval monks, it wasn't just paranoia. It was a grim reality that hung over their every breath. They believed that the air, specifically foul, stinking air, was the cause of the plagues that ravaged Europe. Now, you might think this is all just superstition, a relic of a time before science could tell us about bacteria and viruses. But back in the Middle Ages, the wind was a much more intimate force, capable of carrying sickness through every crack in a building. Monks had a particularly keen awareness of it. They didn't just rely on their sight or sound to detect danger. They trusted their noses. The stench of miasma, as they called it, was a telltale sign that something wasn't right. As you imagine yourself inside a cool, damp stone cell, maybe you're praying, maybe you're just trying to get some sleep, you catch a whiff of something terrible. It's not just the usual smell of incense or damp stone that fills the air. No, it's something far worse. The stench of death, decay, and sickness. That's miasma, air so foul that it was believed to carry disease with it. And it wasn't just bad air, it was a bad omen. The monks, in their isolation, would often pray that the air around them would be purified, but it wasn't always enough. They'd light incense to mask the smell, hoping to push away the harmful winds. They'd even burn herbs and spices, but nothing could truly cleanse the air. And so, they would pray harder. It wasn't just a matter of physical health, it was a matter of spiritual health. The monks believed that if the wind was carrying something as foul as disease, it was because something had gone wrong in the spiritual realm. It wasn't just about germs, it was about sin. Historians still argue whether this idea of miasma had any real basis in medical science, but there's no doubt that the monks believed it with all their hearts. In their eyes, disease was a direct result of sin. If you were breathing bad air, you must have done something to deserve it. It wasn't just about hygiene or sanitation, it was a matter of morality. Your very breath could reveal whether you were pure or impure. And if the air you breathed was tainted, then so were you. You can almost hear the monks whispering in their cloistered halls, each one hoping the wind would carry a sign of salvation, but never quite knowing if it would bring judgment instead. The constant presence of the wind and the ever-present fear that it carried sickness became a background hum to their lives. It was a reminder that sin and sickness were never far apart. But it wasn't just foul air that the monks feared. Oh no, the wind had many more tricks up its sleeve. If you thought flatulence couldn't be a spiritual concern, think again. Some monks believed that breaking wind wasn't just a bodily function, it could be a divine act. Yes, you read that right. A monk who let out a fart in the middle of his prayers might have been seen as either purging sin or performing a strange form of spiritual cleansing. It's strange to think about now, but back then, every little thing had spiritual weight. A monk's every movement, every breath, even his bodily functions, could be viewed as a reflection of his spiritual purity. In a world where everything was connected to the divine, even something as mundane as flatulence was imbued with meaning. It wasn't just a natural function, it was a message. And yes, sometimes it was the wind itself that was thought to carry these divine messages, like a physical manifestation of a monk's spiritual state. So, imagine the scene. You're a monk in a cold, dimly lit room, the only light coming from a flickering candle. You've just finished your prayers, and as you rise from your knees, you hear the faintest rumble. The wind outside picks up, carrying with it a sudden shift in the air. You feel it in your chest, in your gut, and maybe there's a little fart in the air too. For the monks, this wasn't something to be ashamed of. Oh no, this was seen as part of the grand cosmic dance. The air was shifting, the spirits were moving, and perhaps, just maybe, a little divine wind had passed through. Remember that miasma we talked about earlier? It wasn't just something to fear for its association with illness. It also had a much more immediate and personal implication. The wind could carry not just the illness of the body, but the sickness of the soul. Every breath was a reflection of your internal state. And sometimes, the monks believed that this divine judgment could be carried by something as simple as the air, sweeping through the monastery with a quiet, unseen force. But just when you think it's all about bad air and spiritual flatulence, things get even weirder. Plagues, the monks believed, weren't just caused by physical factors. They were divine judgments. And they believed the wind could carry these judgments directly from heaven or from hell. So, as you lie in your bed, drifting off to sleep in your cold, stone cell, you might have started wondering, what if the next gust of wind wasn't just a breeze? What if it carried something far darker? The wind can be such a quiet thing, can it? It's there, but you only notice it when it shifts or when it howls, like a distant voice you can't quite place. Now imagine being a monk in the Middle Ages, lying in your bed, the air around you thick with the scent of incense and candle smoke. You hear the wind rustling through the trees, or maybe it's brushing against the stone walls, but instead of offering a sense of comfort, it fills you with dread. This wind is no ordinary breeze. No, to these monks, it was the very breath of the universe, carrying with it not just the sense of nature, but also the whispers of sin and punishment. The wind wasn't simply a force of nature, it was a messenger. And if the wind was foul, then so was the message it carried. Now, you might be wondering, how does wind become so significant? Why did the monks believe that it could carry disease and divine judgment in one gust? It's because, to them, everything was interconnected. The physical and the spiritual realms weren't two separate worlds. They were woven together, and the air itself played a key role in that connection. The wind wasn't just a neutral force. It was a bridge between heaven and earth. And when the wind carried bad air, it wasn't just the air that was bad. It was the message from the heavens. It was a warning that something had gone horribly wrong. You can almost hear the monks in their cloistered rooms, muttering their prayers, hoping that the wind would bring a message of mercy. But instead, they might have feared that the air would bring the scent of death. In the Middle Ages, disease wasn't just a medical condition. It was a spiritual event. The wind, they believed, could carry the divine punishment for sin. A foul breeze could be the breath of a vengeful god, punishing the world for its wrongdoing. And, in the case of the plagues, that punishment was swift and brutal. But it wasn't just the wind's smell that made it such an ominous presence. No, the wind itself was seen as a force capable of bringing about physical illness. The idea of miasma, or bad air, was central to medieval understandings of disease. The monks believed that disease didn't just spread through contact or contagion. No, it spread through the very air you breathed. So, if the wind was foul, it could infect you, carrying disease directly into your lungs. The plague wasn't just a disease of the body, it was a disease of the soul, and the air was the vehicle of that sickness. Imagine yourself sitting in a quiet, dark chapel, listening to the wind howling outside. Every now and then, you'd hear the clink of a candle's flame flickering, the occasional shuffle of a monk's sandals on the stone floor. And just then, the wind picks up, and you catch the faintest scent, a stench that makes your stomach turn. It's not just the smell of decay, but something worse. This is the scent of miasma. The wind carries with it a message, one that can't be ignored. And so, the monks would pray harder and harder, hoping that the wind would change, that it would bring a sign of mercy. But the monks weren't the only ones who thought the wind had a role to play in the plague. There were others who believed that the wind itself could be a divine punishment. Some thought that the wind carried with it the wrath of God, a sign that humanity had sinned so deeply that even the air itself was polluted. This wasn't just superstition. It was a belief that permeated the very fabric of life in the Middle Ages. People believed that the wind could bring disaster, disease, and death, and they feared that the winds could change the very fate of their world. Historians still argue whether this belief was rooted in any sort of factual evidence or if it was simply the result of medieval ignorance. But one thing is clear: the monks believed it with all their hearts. They saw the wind as an omen, a harbinger of what was to come. And they knew that if the wind shifted, it wasn't just the air that would change. It was the very course of human history. A plague wasn't just a medical issue. It was a spiritual event, and the wind was the messenger. Now let's talk about the more earthy side of things. We've all been there, right? That moment when you can't hold it in anymore, and nature takes its course. The monks? Well, they were a little more spiritual about it. They believed that flatulence, yes, you read that correctly, could have divine significance. In their minds, letting out a fart wasn't just a natural function. No, it was a release of sin. The air that left your body in such a fragrant manner was seen as a form of purification. It wasn't just about bodily release. It was about cleansing the soul. So, when the wind blew, some monks believed that a little wind of their own might be a sign of spiritual release. Odd, isn't it? But let's get back to the wind itself. The monks were convinced that the air carried with it the power of divine judgment. They believed that it wasn't just the wind that was responsible for the spread of disease. It was the divine breath that carried the punishment. It's strange to think that such a common, everyday element of nature could hold so much weight. The wind wasn't just air. It was a divine messenger, a warning that something had gone wrong and that correction was needed. As you settle deeper into your bed, listening to the wind outside, you might feel a strange sense of connection to those monks of centuries ago. The wind has always been there, hasn't it? Always shifting, always changing. And if they could hear the whispers in the wind, maybe we can too. Perhaps the breeze carries messages we can't understand just yet. Maybe that gust of wind is a reminder that, in the end, nothing is truly in our control. Imagine for a moment the sound of a monk's prayer, a soft murmur in a cold stone chapel, the faint rustling of a robe, the clink of wooden beads slipping through fingers. As the monk chants, you might notice the air around him, heavy with incense and prayer. But there's something more, something you can't quite place. It's the wind. That soft, constant breeze drifting in from an open window, bringing with it a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The monk, so attuned to the spiritual realm, can feel it. And it's not just the air he's sensing. It's the divine message carried within it. In medieval times, monks believed that the wind could carry more than just the scent of flowers or the chill of an incoming storm. No. They believed that the wind itself had divine significance. It wasn't simply a breeze or a gust. It was a messenger from heaven, or perhaps from hell. They thought that the wind could carry the whispers of angels or the growl of demons, and it was the job of these devout men to discern its meaning. And sometimes, that meaning wasn't as comforting as you might hope. The wind's message, as it whispered through the monastery, was more than just a forewarning of the weather. It was a sign that could carry divine judgment. The monks believed that when the wind blew through the monastery, it was sending a message from God. The direction of the wind, its strength, and its peculiarities could all point to the fate of the world and of their souls. Some even went so far as to say that the wind carried not just the air of life, but also the power of the soul itself. But why would God choose to speak through something as seemingly mundane as the wind? It's because, in the medieval mind, everything was connected. The physical world wasn't separate from the spiritual one. It was a reflection of it. And so, when the wind blew in a certain direction, it wasn't just a change in the weather. It was a sign of something much deeper. A change in the wind could be a warning of impending disaster. It could be a divine warning that something, somewhere, had gone terribly wrong. Now, as you sit there, imagining yourself in that same chapel, you can't help but feel the tension in the air. The wind has shifted, and you can sense that something is amiss. The monks, ever vigilant, would pause in their prayers, looking up, trying to discern what the wind was telling them. The air is heavy now, the wind picking up speed, as if it has a message to deliver. Perhaps it's a message of doom. But that's not all. There was a strange belief among some monks that the wind carried with it the power of purification. Remember those prayers we talked about earlier? Well, the monks believed that sometimes the wind wasn't just a bearer of messages. It could be a purifier of the soul. They thought that the very act of breathing in the air, especially the holy wind, could cleanse them of their sins. The wind was seen as a kind of spiritual filter, a way to cleanse the soul from impurities. But let's take it even further. The monks didn't just think of the wind as a purifier. They believed it could also cleanse the body. You might be wondering, how could a simple breeze purify someone physically? Well, let's talk about one of the more peculiar beliefs that cropped up in the medieval period. The idea that flatulence, yes, bodily flatulence, could serve as a form of spiritual release. In their minds, breaking wind wasn't just about releasing air. It was about releasing sin. Some monks believed that letting out a fart was an act of purification, a way to rid the body of the impurities that the soul had accumulated. Think about it. The very wind that carried disease could also be the same wind that carried purification. The monks saw it as a paradox. The wind could be a sign of judgment, but it could also be a sign of divine mercy. The same air that could carry the stench of death could also carry the scent of holiness. It was a duality that the monks had to grapple with, and in their minds, it was as natural as breathing itself. Now, here's where things get a little strange. Some monks even believed that the wind could be a sign of heavenly intervention. They thought that the wind could carry with it the voice of God, speaking to them directly. And if the wind grew calm, that was a sign of peace. But if it grew violent, well, that was a sign that God's wrath was upon them. The monks, ever cautious, would interpret the wind's moods, looking for signs that would guide their actions. Historians still argue whether the monks' fascination with the wind was simply a product of their intense religious devotion, or whether it had some basis in the understanding of nature. But one thing is certain: the monks were deeply connected to the air around them. They didn't just live in the physical world. They were constantly attuned to the spiritual world that they believed existed alongside it. And the wind, in all its forms, was one of the most powerful symbols of that connection. As you continue to imagine yourself in this medieval world, you can almost hear the wind picking up speed, howling through the stone walls of the monastery. It's no longer just a breeze, it's a presence that carries with it the weight of judgment, purification, and perhaps even salvation. And as the monks continue their prayers, they know that whatever message the wind carries, they must be prepared to face it. You can feel it now, can't you? That shift in the air. It's more than just a change in temperature, more than just a breeze that brushes against your skin. It's a weight, a presence that seems to fill the very space around you. You lie there, resting on your bed of straw, as the monks chant softly, their voices blending with the soft rustling of robes. Outside, the wind is picking up, its howls growing louder, more persistent. And as the wind swirls around the monastery, you start to wonder, is this just the wind, or is it something more? In the medieval world, the wind wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It was seen as the very breath of God. To the monks, every gust carried a message. Every change in direction was a sign. And when the wind began to howl in ways that seemed unnatural, they believed it was a sign of something terrible. The air itself was a messenger, and when it blew harshly or carried a foul scent, it was seen as a warning of something to come. The plagues, for instance, weren't just random occurrences. They were divine punishments. And the wind, that omnipresent force, was thought to carry the message of God's wrath. Imagine yourself lying there in the monastery, hearing the wind howl through the cracks in the walls. The very air seems to be carrying a message, but the monks aren't just listening to it. They're praying, hoping that the wind will bring a sign of mercy, a sign that the plague would not come for them. In their minds, the air carried the power to heal, but it also carried the power to destroy. As you listen to the wind outside, you might feel a strange sense of unease. The monks would have too. They believed that if the wind blew from the east, it was a sign that judgment was coming. The wind from the east wasn't just a breeze. It was the harbinger of divine punishment. It was as though the very air itself was filled with the wrath of God, a wrath that would sweep through the world and take those who had sinned. The wind from the east was a powerful symbol, one that carried with it a sense of impending doom. But the monks also believed that it was the wind from the east that would bring the plague. The idea was that when the wind carried the scent of decay, of death, it was the breath of divine judgment. The air itself became the vehicle of God's anger. The monks would often pray in fear, hoping that the wind would change direction, hoping that they would be spared. Historians still argue about whether the monks' fear of the wind was based on any understanding of science or if it was just a product of their deep religious beliefs. But one thing is certain: the wind played a central role in their understanding of the plagues. It was the wind that carried the sickness, and it was the wind that carried the message of doom. The very air they breathed became a reminder that death could come at any moment, and they had no control over it. The plague, it seemed, was as much a spiritual event as it was a physical one. But what if the wind wasn't just a symbol of divine wrath? What if it was also a sign of something else, something darker? Some monks believed that the wind itself was a manifestation of Satan, the very breath of the devil. The wind, they thought, was the demon's vehicle, a way for Satan to spread his influence throughout the world. When the wind howled and carried the stench of decay, it wasn't just a sign of plague, it was a sign of the devil's presence. Imagine, if you will, the monks in their cloisters, the candlelight flickering as they listen to the wind. The air is thick with fear, and the wind, which had once been a sign of divine will, now feels like an ominous presence. Some believed that Satan himself traveled on the wind, spreading his corruption across the land. The wind, then, wasn't just a force of nature. It was a conduit for evil, the very breath of hell itself. But what if the monks were right? What if the wind really did carry these messages from the spiritual realm? The air around you is so thick now, so heavy with meaning, that you can almost feel it pressing against your chest. The monks, with their prayers and their devotion, were convinced that the wind carried messages from a world beyond their own. And when the wind howled, it wasn't just nature at work. It was a warning, a sign that something terrible was on the horizon. As you lie there in your cot, the wind howling outside, you can't help but feel that strange connection to those monks of old. They believed that the very air they breathed could bring salvation or destruction, and the wind, for them, was the ultimate messenger. It wasn't just a breeze that rustled the leaves or moved the curtains. It was the breath of the world itself, carrying with it the power to change lives, to bring judgment, and to carry death. You might start to feel uneasy, but that's exactly what the monks felt too. The wind, in their eyes, wasn't just a force of nature, it was a force of the divine. It was a reminder that they were never truly alone, that the world was always listening, and that the air could carry messages they might not fully understand. And as the wind picks up, you realize, perhaps you're not just lying here in your bed. Maybe you're part of something much larger. Perhaps the wind is speaking to you too. As the hours pass, the wind continues its eerie dance outside, gently pushing at the edges of your consciousness. It seems as if the very air itself is alive, pulsating with a strange energy. You lie in your cot, listening to the quiet creaks of the monastery around you. The soft murmur of prayer from the other monks is almost drowned out by the wind. And in the midst of this calm chaos, you begin to wonder, was the wind always this powerful? Or is it just that the monks have taught you to listen for it? The air, once simply a background to life, now seems filled with meaning, with messages that you can't quite decipher. The monks, deeply attuned to the spiritual realm, believed that every gust, Every shift in the wind carried something more than just air. It carried the essence of life and death. They believed that the wind wasn't a mere force of nature. It was a direct reflection of the divine. The wind could tell you whether you were walking the path of salvation or heading toward damnation. It could carry with it signs of God's favor or portents of his anger. And when the plagues came, when death swept across the land like an unstoppable tide, the monks were convinced that the wind was not just carrying sickness, it was the very agent of divine punishment. But what if the wind didn't just signify punishment? What if it was something more subtle, more insidious? Some monks believed that the wind was tied to something darker than just divine wrath. As you lie there in the quiet of the monastery, you might begin to hear faint whispers in the wind. The monks would say these were the voices of the damned, carried on the air, their souls trapped in the gusts. The wind, for some, became a harbinger not just of death, but of eternal torment. There's a strange tension in the air, isn't there? It's almost as if the wind itself is carrying something more than just the whispers of the damned. It's as if the air is heavy with the weight of the sins of the world. The monks, in their quiet cells, would have felt it too. They believed that the wind carried with it the weight of all the wrongs committed by humanity. Each gust of air was a reminder that sin had consequences, and it wasn't just the living who had to answer for their sins. It was the very air itself that was stained. But even with all these ominous thoughts, there was another side to the monk's relationship with the wind. You see, the wind wasn't always seen as a force of destruction. There was another side to it, a more positive view that intertwined with their sense of spirituality. When the wind was calm, when it was gentle and soothing, it was thought to carry blessings. Some monks believed that the wind could carry the breath of the Holy Spirit, a divine presence that could bring peace and healing. They believed that a gentle breeze, wafting through the monastery, could purify their hearts and souls, washing away the sins of the day. The contrast between the two sides of the wind, the destructive and the healing, was a constant source of fascination for the monks. To them, the wind was never a neutral force. It was a constant reminder that the world they lived in was full of contradictions, full of both light and darkness. They prayed for the wind to bring peace, but they feared that it might bring destruction. In many ways, the wind mirrored the duality of life itself, the struggle between good and evil, salvation and damnation. You might wonder if the monks ever grew tired of this constant fear, this ever-present awareness that the wind could carry both life and death. But they didn't. Instead, they leaned into it. They embraced the mystery of the wind, knowing that it was a force beyond their understanding. The monks would spend hours in silent contemplation, listening to the wind, interpreting its changes, and hoping for a sign. They were aware that they were at the mercy of something far greater than themselves, and in that, there was a strange peace. Historians still debate whether the monks' obsession with the wind was purely a product of their deep spirituality, or if it was a response to the very real dangers they faced. After all, the plagues were not just spiritual matters, they were physical too. The monks saw the wind as a mirror to their spiritual lives, and in the process, they developed a way of understanding the world that transcended the purely physical. The wind became a symbol of both fear and hope, a sign of both destruction and salvation. But let's step away from the monks for a moment and think about the broader implications of their beliefs. If the wind could carry sin and sickness, could it also carry redemption? Could the very air you breathed offer you a path to spiritual salvation? For the monks, the answer was yes. They believed that if they could purify the air, if they could cleanse the wind, then they could purify their souls and avoid divine wrath. This was part of their daily rituals, burning incense, praying, and offering penance to cleanse both themselves and the air around them. And yet, even in the midst of all their efforts, there were times when the wind refused to cooperate. The plagues, despite all their prayers, still came, carried on the very wind that they had hoped would bring salvation. The monks would find themselves praying harder, hoping for a shift in the wind, but the plagues never ceased. It was as if the very air around them had become tainted, and no amount of prayer or purification could change it. The wind, once a source of divine comfort, had become a relentless force of destruction, carrying with it the weight of the world's sins. By now, as you lie in the quiet darkness, you can almost hear it again. The wind, that steady, haunting rhythm, growing more insistent with each passing hour. It howls in the distance, pushing through the cracks in the monastery's stone walls, as if it were trying to speak directly to you. You can almost feel it in your chest, pressing against your lungs, as though it's forcing you to listen, to understand something more. And the monks, well, they felt it too. They were no strangers to the eerie power of the wind, which seemed to shift from one minute to the next, constantly changing direction, always unpredictable. The wind wasn't simply a thing to observe, it was something to interpret, a sign to read. Some monks, with their deep faith, believed that every gust, every breeze, was a message from a higher power. The air, for them, was filled with meaning. It carried with it omens, signs of what was to come. Some would have called it prophecy, a divine warning, or a whisper from God. But for others, the wind was less about divine prophecy and more about the cold reality of life and death. And yet, what did the monks make of the plagues? How did they square their belief that the wind carried divine judgment with the relentless and horrifying spread of disease? For them, it wasn't a question of science. It was a question of faith. They saw the plagues as God's wrath upon a sinful world. The wind, they believed, was the messenger, carrying the curse of disease and death from one place to another. The air, once a source of comfort, had turned into something far more ominous. It wasn't just the smell of death that they feared. It was the knowledge that their own sins had brought them to this point. The wind was carrying that judgment. In the monastery's stone chapel, you might hear the faint rustling of prayer beads as the monks quietly chant, their voices nearly drowned out by the howling wind outside. The wind doesn't stop. It presses on, its relentless howl a reminder that time is running out. For the monks, this was the ultimate test of their faith. Could they withstand the storm, both in the air and in their hearts? Could they stay true to their beliefs, even as the plague swept across the land, carried on the very wind they had once seen as a symbol of divine mercy? And just as you think the wind might stop, it shifts once again. This time, it comes from the east, stronger than before, as though it's carrying with it the very weight of the world's sins. The monks, upon hearing it, know what this means. They've heard these winds before. These aren't just breezes. These are the winds of death. The wind from the east brings the plague, they believe. It's a harbinger, a divine messenger warning of what's to come. The very air they breathe becomes a conduit for their guilt. The wind, once thought to be a mere force of nature, is now seen as the very breath of God's judgment. The monks, isolated in their cloistered walls, can do little but pray. Their prayers are desperate now, pleading for mercy, pleading for the wind to change, for the plague to pass them by. But the wind has no mercy. It continues to blow, pushing through the cracks, carrying with it the sound of distant cries, the smell of decay. The connection between the monks and the wind runs deep. They believed that the wind could carry their prayers to heaven, that the air could carry their pleas for mercy directly to God. But now, as the wind howls, they realize something else. That same wind might carry their sins to heaven as well. Each gust is a reminder of the things they've done, of the ways they've failed. In the face of the plague, they realize that no prayer, no amount of incense, can cleanse the air of the guilt that hangs heavy over them. Historians still argue about the true nature of the monks' beliefs. Were they simply superstitious? Or were they tapping into something deeper, something spiritual that connected them to the world around them in ways we might not understand? There's no clear answer, of course. But one thing is certain. The wind was a central part of their spiritual life. It wasn't just a natural occurrence. It was a living, breathing force that could bring salvation or destruction. The monks weren't just at the mercy of the plagues. They were at the mercy of the very air they breathed. As the wind continues to howl outside, you might begin to sense a shift in the air around you too. It's no longer just a background hum. It's a presence, a reminder that even in the stillness of the night, the world is always moving, always changing. The wind that the monks once saw as a messenger of God's will has now become something more. It is both the harbinger of death and the bearer of prayer. The same air that could carry disease could also carry the souls of the faithful to heaven. And so, as you lie there, you wonder, what messages does the wind carry to you? What is it telling you as it shifts, as it changes direction, as it howls in the distance? In the silence of your room, the wind doesn't stop. It presses on, ever present. For the monks, this was their reality. The wind, carrying with it the weight of their sins, their hopes, and their prayers. They could no more escape the wind than they could escape their own fate. The air, heavy with meaning, would continue to shift and change, carrying with it whatever message the monks were meant to hear. The wind stirs again, this time with an almost unnatural strength. It pushes against the walls of the monastery, rattling the windows, and fills the air with an eerie sense of foreboding. You lie there, feeling the heavy air pressing in around you, and for a moment, you might feel like you're no longer just in your bed, but caught in the same tension the monks experienced, caught between heaven and earth, between divine judgment and the hope for salvation. You can almost hear the monks in their cells, muttering their prayers, their voices rising against the storm outside. But no matter how hard they pray, the wind keeps coming. It's a strange paradox, isn't it? The monks are desperate for the wind to bring them relief, to carry their prayers to heaven. But at the same time, they know the wind might bring with it the very opposite. The air that carries their guilt, the air that carries the plague, the air that might carry death. As the wind howls outside, they cannot escape its presence, and in that helplessness, they turn to prayer. They beg for the wind to change, for the plague to pass by. But the wind has no mercy. It is impartial, neither kind nor cruel, just a force of nature, carrying whatever it finds in its path. For you, lying there in the silence of your room, It might feel like the wind is carrying something else, something intangible. Perhaps it's the weight of history itself, the knowledge that you're connected to those monks across time, across space. The wind they feared and revered is still blowing. It's the same wind that moves the trees outside your window. The same wind that brushes your skin, that carries the scent of the earth, the smell of rain, the promise of change. The monks believed that the wind could carry sin, but they also believed it could carry virtue. The wind was not only a harbinger of divine wrath, it was also a medium through which divine mercy could flow. They prayed for the wind to purify them, to take their sins away, to carry them to a higher place. But the wind, like the world itself, was unpredictable, capricious. Sometimes it brought blessings, sometimes it brought disaster. And for the monks, there was no way of knowing when the wind would carry one or the other. It was both a gift and a curse, and they were at the mercy of its changing moods. As the wind shifts outside, the monks might begin to wonder, has it changed direction? Is it still carrying their prayers, or has it begun to carry the judgment they so fear? They would listen closely, as they had for years, attuning themselves to the smallest changes in the air, hoping to catch some sign that the wind would bring peace, that it would bring the end of the plague. But the wind remained as it always had, unpredictable and constant, a reminder that the monks were not in control of the world, no matter how hard they tried to purify it. The connection between the wind and sin is almost palpable. For the monks, it wasn't just the bad air that carried disease. It was a sign of moral corruption. The plague wasn't merely a physical illness. It was a spiritual ailment, a punishment for the sins of mankind. And the wind, in its infinite power, was both the messenger of that punishment and the means by which it spread. The monks believed that the very air they breathed was a reflection of their spiritual purity. If the wind carried bad air, then their souls must also be stained. The air, in their eyes, was a mirror of their own hearts. As the wind howls through the cracks in the monastery, you can almost feel the weight of their belief, can't you? The idea that the wind is not just a natural phenomenon, but a spiritual force, capable of carrying the very essence of life and death. The monks, in their desperation, would have prayed that the wind would change, that it would bring peace, that it would cleanse them of their sins. But no matter how hard they prayed, the wind kept blowing, carrying with it the same sense of uncertainty, of fear, of helplessness. In the midst of the storm, the monks might have believed that the wind itself was a trial, a test of their faith. Could they remain true to their beliefs, even as the world around them seemed to unravel? Could they trust in the mercy of God, even as the wind carried the plague, carrying death and destruction in its wake? The wind, for the monks, was a constant reminder that they were not in control, that they were at the mercy of forces far greater than themselves. As you lie there, listening to the wind, you begin to understand just how deeply the monks believed in its power. The wind was never just wind. It was a spiritual force, a force of nature that could bring both judgment and grace. The wind that carried disease could also carry salvation. It was the breath of life, but it was also the breath of death. And in the monk's eyes, it was a reminder that everything in the world, every gust of air, every change in direction, was a reflection of something far greater. Historians still debate whether the monks' obsession with the wind was rooted in superstition or in a profound connection to the natural world. Were they simply terrified by the winds they could not understand, or did they see something more, something that eluded the rest of the world? Whatever the case, one thing is certain. The wind was never just wind to them. It was a messenger, a symbol of divine will, and a constant reminder that they were not alone in this world, that the very air they breathed carried meaning. As you drift off to sleep, the wind continues to whisper in your ears, carrying with it the secrets of the past, the lessons of the monks, and the reminder that sometimes we are all at the mercy of forces beyond our control. The wind shifts again, carrying with it an odd sense of finality. It's as though the air around you has taken on a heavy weight, pressing down on your chest with a strange urgency. You lie in your bed, listening to the distant creaks of the monastery, wondering if this is it, the moment when everything finally changes. The monks, too, would have sensed it. For them, every shift in the wind, every change in the air, was a moment of great significance. There was no such thing as an ordinary breeze. No, every gust carried meaning, whether it was the breath of God or the whispered threat of judgment. Now, as the wind howls through the monastery's stone walls, you might begin to feel the tension rise in the air. It's no longer just a physical sensation. It's spiritual too. The monks, in their humble cells, would have known what this meant. They would have prayed harder, more fervently than ever before. The wind, once a symbol of divine mercy, now feels like an omen, a sign that their prayers might not be enough. The plague is at their doorstep, and the air itself seems to be closing in on them. The wind from the east. You've heard this before, haven't you? The monks spoke of it in hushed tones, their faces drawn with fear as they recalled the ancient belief. When the wind comes from the east, it brings the plague. It's a belief deeply ingrained in their minds, one that connects the natural world with the spiritual realm in ways that are hard for us to understand. To the monks, the wind wasn't just wind. It was a harbinger of death, a divine message carried on the air, telling them that their sins were too great, that punishment was coming. For the monks, there was no escaping the wind. It was in the very air they breathed. And now, as the wind howls, the monks would pray with all their might, begging for mercy, hoping that somehow the wind would change its course, that the plague would pass them by. But deep down, they knew that they were powerless. They had no control over the wind, no way of changing its course. They were at the mercy of something far greater than themselves. And as the wind continues to swirl outside, you can't help but feel the same helplessness that the monks must have felt. The wind, which once brought comfort and peace, now feels like a threat. It presses in on you, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. You can almost hear the monks' desperate prayers rising up, joining with the wind, hoping to be carried to heaven, hoping for a sign that they will be spared. But the wind, as always, remains indifferent. It moves as it pleases, carrying with it whatever it finds in its path. Historians still debate the monks' deep connection to the wind. Was it simply superstition, a way of making sense of the world around them? Or was there something more profound at play? Did they truly believe that the wind carried the weight of their sins? Or were they simply looking for an explanation for the tragedies that unfolded around them? Either way, the wind played a central role in their lives, one that couldn't be easily dismissed. It was both a source of fear and a source of hope, a force of nature that was as unpredictable as it was powerful. As the hours drag on, the wind doesn't stop. It continues its relentless howling, pressing against the monastery walls, carrying with it the scent of decay, of death, of something worse. And for the monks, there's no escape. They are trapped in this world, at the mercy of the wind, at the mercy of divine judgment. They have no choice but to wait, to pray, and to hope that the wind will change, that it will bring mercy instead of wrath. But the wind, as it always does, remains unchanged. In the quiet darkness, you feel a strange sense of connection to the monks. You realize that, like them, you're at the mercy of forces you cannot control. The wind, once a gentle breeze, now feels like a force that is both beyond your comprehension and impossible to ignore. You lie there, listening to the howling wind, and for the first time, you truly understand the weight of their fear, the weight of their faith. For the monks, the wind wasn't just something they heard, it was something they felt deep within their souls. It was a reminder of their mortality, a reminder that they were at the mercy of forces greater than themselves. And as the plague ravaged the world around them, the wind carried that reminder with it, over hills and through valleys, across continents and centuries. It was a constant, a force of nature that could never be tamed, never be controlled. As the wind continues to howl, you lie there, thinking about the monks, about their prayers, about their desperate hope for salvation. And in that quiet, you realize something important. The wind doesn't just carry disease. It doesn't just carry death. It also carries the possibility of change. The wind, after all, can shift. It can change direction. It can bring relief, just as easily as it can bring destruction. And in that thought, there's hope. There's a possibility that one day the wind might bring something else, a sign of mercy, a sign of salvation. But for now, as the wind howls on, you lie there, waiting, listening. The wind may be indifferent, but you are not. You are here, present, feeling the weight of the air, the weight of history, and the weight of the monks' prayers. And you know that whatever happens next, you too are at the mercy of the wind. By now, the wind outside has become a constant presence, a reminder that time is moving, that things are changing, and that the monks, in their quiet chambers, are not the only ones who feel its power. There's an unspoken connection between the wind and the people in the monastery. The monks, so attuned to the spiritual world, sense that they are not merely living through history, they are entwined with it. The wind doesn't just mark the passage of time. It carries with it the weight of centuries, the legacy of all those who have come before them. The monks, in their daily prayers, are connected to a larger story, one that stretches back to the dawn of time itself. You, too, are caught in this same current. The wind presses against your skin, reminding you that history is always with you, that you are part of a world that is always moving, always changing, always in flux. You can feel the weight of the past in the air, as if the very atmosphere holds the stories of those who have lived before you. The wind doesn't just carry the present, it carries the past and the future as well. For the monks, this feeling was perhaps more acute. They believed that the air around them was filled with divine messages, with signs from God, and sometimes from Satan. The wind, which had once seemed like nothing more than a simple force of nature, had become something far more significant. It was a bridge between the physical world and the spiritual one, a conduit for divine will. It was a way for the monks to connect with the world beyond, to seek guidance and forgiveness. And yet, in the midst of their prayers, there was a growing realization that the wind was no longer just a sign of divine favor. No, the monks could feel it too. The air was changing. It was no longer a message of mercy or salvation. Instead, it had taken on a darker tone. The wind from the east had arrived, carrying with it the scent of decay and the shadow of death. The plague, which had already begun to ravage the land, was now at their doorstep, carried on the very wind they had once revered. It's a strange thing to think about, isn't it? That the wind, which could be both a blessing and a curse, was now a harbinger of doom. It's as if the monks were trapped in a world they couldn't escape, caught between the mercy of God and the wrath of God, with nothing to hold on to but their faith. The wind, which had once felt like a gentle breath, now seemed to be pressing down on them, suffocating them with its weight. As the monks pray, they realize that no matter how hard they try, they can't control the wind. They can't change its course, can't make it bring salvation instead of destruction. They are at the mercy of the same forces that have shaped the world for centuries, forces beyond their understanding, beyond their control. And yet, despite everything, they continue to pray, hoping that the wind will bring mercy, that it will somehow change direction and spare them from the plague that is sweeping the land. The monks' connection to the wind, their belief in its divine significance, is a reflection of something deeper, something that runs through all of us. We are all at the mercy of forces beyond our control, whether we believe in them or not. The wind, like time itself, is a force that cannot be tamed. It moves with a power and purpose that we can't always understand. And yet, like the monks, we continue to pray, continue to hope that somehow the winds will change, that the storm will pass. You lie there in your bed, feeling the weight of the air pressing down on you. It's as if the wind is speaking to you too, reminding you that you are part of something much larger than yourself. History, faith, and the natural world are all interconnected, bound together by invisible threads that we can't always see. And in the face of the unknown, all we can do is hope that the winds of fate will carry us to a place of safety, a place of peace. The monks too would have hoped for that. They would have prayed for mercy, for the wind to change, for the plague to be lifted from their land. But despite their prayers, they were at the mercy of something greater than themselves. The very wind that had once carried their prayers to heaven was now the same wind that carried death and disease. They were trapped in a world where they had no control, where their faith was the only thing that could keep them grounded. And so, as you listen to the wind outside, you might feel a sense of connection to those monks, to all the people who have lived before you, who have prayed in times of crisis, who have hoped for a change in the wind, a change in the air. The wind, in all its power, is a reminder that we are all part of something larger, something we can't fully understand. It carries the weight of history, the weight of sin and salvation, the weight of our shared humanity. Historians still debate the role of the wind in the lives of these monks, whether it was simply a product of superstition or if they truly believed it had the power to shape their destiny. But one thing is certain: the wind was never just a physical force. It was a spiritual presence, a reminder that we are all connected to something greater than ourselves, and that sometimes all we can do is wait for the wind to change. The night deepens, and with it, the wind sharpens. It snakes through the eaves of the monastery, stirring tapestries, tugging at shutters, whispering in forgotten corridors. You're still lying there, blankets pulled tight. But now you can almost feel something more, a presence in the breeze, not just cold air or damp mist, but something knowing, something watching, The monks certainly believed it. For them, the wind didn't only carry divine messages, it carried demons. Yes, demons, actual wind-riding, plague-spreading entities sent to torment mankind. The devil himself, they believed, traveled by wind. He didn't just stalk battlefields or lurk in the corners of sinful taverns. No, he arrived on a gust, a sudden draft through the chapel, a howling squall in the dead of night. When the wind changed abruptly, they said Satan had taken flight. And honestly, who could blame them? The plague swept in with no warning, no visible cause. One day the monastery was solemn but serene, and the next, a brother collapsed mid-prayer, sweating, coughing, then silent. No wounds, no crime, just a breath, and then gone. What else could explain such invisible destruction, if not a demon on the breeze? You can picture the abbot, pacing the candlelit hall, eyes fixed on the arched window, robes brushing the flagstone floor. He stops as the wind picks up, cold, sharp, eastern. He doesn't say a word, but he lights more candles, sprinkles holy water at the threshold. He orders the younger monks to burn herbs, thick and acrid, in hopes of purifying the air. There's fear in his eyes, but it's not just fear of plague. It's fear that the devil has already crossed the threshold. Theological writings of the time describe evil forces as subtle, formless things, like smoke on the wind, capable of infiltrating even the most sacred spaces. Some even claimed to have seen dark figures flicker past their windows when the wind howled fiercest. The monks feared these apparitions not because they looked terrifying, but because they had no form at all. Nothing to grab, nothing to fight. Just presence, just air. So naturally, they tried to fight air with air. They'd hang strips of blessed cloth at the windows, hoping to trap the malevolent breeze. They'd grind rose petals into paste and smear it under their nostrils as a soul filter. They'd cough aggressively after a sudden gust, believing the devil could be dislodged if you expelled him fast enough. And if all else failed, well, then came the chants. Oh, the chants. Long, droning, nasal intonations echoing through the cloisters, designed not just to praise but to ward off. You can almost hear it now. Deep, humming voices, layered in harmonic tension, vibrating the very stone. The air itself shudders with it, and for a moment, you'd believe it too. That a demon in the wind might pause, disturbed, and turn away. Historians still argue whether these rituals were sincerely believed or born of desperation. Did the monks truly expect a chant to stop a disease? Or were they simply reaching for control in a world gone mad? Either way, the rituals multiplied. The fear solidified. The devil was no longer an abstract threat lurking in temptation. He had become atmospheric. He moved through the wind like smoke through a room. And he had help. The monks believed that the devil's work was assisted by corrupted souls, sinners whose very breath was a vehicle for evil. Wind became moral. Good people breathed clean air. The wicked exhaled pestilence. That may sound extreme, but in a world without germ theory, linking morality and disease felt natural. You didn't fall ill because you shook someone's hand. You fell ill because the air had been poisoned by sin. Sometimes, the monks accused each other. A brother would fall ill, and instead of comfort, he'd receive suspicion. Did you confess all your sins? Have you been honest in your fasts? Did you invite this wind into your lungs with pride or vanity? The idea that illness could be earned became deeply embedded. Breathing wasn't just involuntary. It was a risk, a spiritual wager. Inhaling without humility might be tantamount to summoning the devil himself. That's how fear turns inward, you see. The wind wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside them, breathing in, breathing out, exchanging air with others, always wondering, was that breath pure? Was that cough divine punishment, or merely the chill of a long vigil? There's something tragic in it, isn't there? The way fear makes the invisible unbearable. The monks, cloistered from the world, already burdened with vows of silence, celibacy, poverty, now feared the very act of breathing. The devil didn't need to knock on the door anymore. He could slip in through your own nose. You lie there now, and the wind rustles faintly outside your window. There's nothing menacing in it, at least, not tonight. But still, your mind lingers on that image. A gust of air, sharp and sudden, curling into a crack in the wall. You wonder, just for a moment, what it carried with it. A blessing? A curse? Or just the quiet echo of a chant, long faded? The wind isn't letting up. Outside, it swirls relentlessly, twisting and turning through the trees, pulling at the branches like it's trying to strip them bare. It's the same wind the monks feared, the same wind that carried with it more than just a chill. It carried a message, a warning. You can almost hear the faint rustling of their robes as they move about the monastery, their eyes darting to the windows, to the cracks in the walls. The monks, always alert, always vigilant, could sense it. The air itself felt different. It was heavier now, filled with something unseen, something they could not escape. They tried, of course. They'd light incense, sacred herbs, and candles, desperate to keep the wind at bay. But the wind was an unstoppable force. No matter what they did, no matter how many prayers they recited, it always found its way in. It crept through the cracks in the monastery's ancient stones, wrapping itself around their lives like an invisible cloak. It wasn't just the physical wind they feared, it was the weight of what it carried. Some believed that the wind could bring salvation, that it was the breath of the Holy Spirit, a divine presence that swept across the land to purify the faithful. But as the plagues raged on, the monks began to fear that the wind was no longer a messenger of mercy. Instead, it became a tool of judgment, carrying the punishment of a wrathful God. The wind, which had once been seen as a sacred force, now seemed to echo with something darker. The monks, as devoted as they were, could no longer ignore the truth. The air around them had become polluted with the scent of death. In the midst of this turmoil, the monks clung to their faith. They prayed for deliverance, for the wind to bring relief. But the wind remained as it always had, unpredictable, merciless, and relentless. It didn't matter how many candles they lit or how many prayers they said. The wind would not change. It had a will of its own. It was as though the air itself had become a mirror, reflecting the very state of their souls. The plagues had come, and they could not escape their fate. But even in the face of this overwhelming force, the monks continued their rituals. They would not allow fear to overcome them. They believed that their faith could still protect them, that their devotion could turn the wind back, that their prayers would be heard. But deep down, they knew that the wind, like everything else, was part of something far greater than themselves. It was part of the world's design, part of the divine will that they could neither control nor understand. As you lie there, listening to the howling wind outside, you can't help but wonder what the monks would have thought if they could see you now. What would they have made of the world you live in? A world where the wind still blows, where storms still rage, but where the spiritual significance of those forces has faded into the background? Would they think that you too are at the mercy of the wind, caught between the forces of fate and divine judgment? Or would they see you as someone who has forgotten the sacred power of the air, the wind, and the spirits that ride it? In their time, the monks lived with the constant knowledge that the wind could carry them to salvation or to ruin. They knew that their very lives, their every breath, could be shaped by something as intangible as the air around them. It was a heavy burden to bear, one that you might struggle to understand in a world so detached from the spiritual forces they believed governed every moment of their lives. But still, the wind blows, doesn't it? And it has carried something with it. For the monks, the wind wasn't just air, it was a reflection of their relationship with the divine. When the wind was calm, when it brought peace, they felt close to God. But when it raged, when it brought with it the scent of decay, they knew they were far from grace. The wind was a constant reminder that the world was unpredictable, that life could change in an instant, and that they were not in control of their fate. And so, as the wind continues its endless dance outside, you're left with the same thought the monks must have had. Is it a blessing, a curse, or simply a force that moves through the world, indifferent to human desires, leaving behind the faintest trace of its passage? The monks may have spent their lives trying to control the wind, praying, chanting, burning incense, but in the end, the wind couldn't be controlled. It was something far bigger than any of them could understand. It was both their greatest fear and their most profound hope, a reminder that they were always at the mercy of something greater than themselves, something wild, something free. Historians still debate the monks' fascination with the wind, but one thing remains clear. It was never just a weather pattern to them. It was the breath of life, the breath of the divine, the breath of the devil, all rolled into one. And it was something they could never escape. So as you lie there, listening to the wind's restless whispers, you can't help but feel the weight of it. It's not just wind anymore, is it? It's a story that's been told for centuries, a story of fear and hope, of life and death, a story that you too are now a part of. The wind shifts once more, a sudden gust that rattles the windows and stirs the silent corners of the monastery. You can feel it now, can't you? The air is heavier, as though it carries not just cold, but something far deeper. A weight of centuries, of faith, of prayers whispered in desperate hope. It's almost as if the wind itself is becoming part of your story too, a bridge between past and present, between the monk's world and yours. And as the air moves, you realize that it has always carried something more than just the physical world. It carries the imprint of history, of faith, of the very souls who lived and prayed before you. For the monks, the wind was never just air. It was a living, breathing force, a reminder that the world was constantly in motion, constantly shifting. The monks prayed not only for themselves, but for the air around them. They believed that if they could purify their surroundings, if they could bring peace to the space they occupied, they could avoid divine wrath. But despite their fervent efforts, despite the incense and holy chants, the wind would not yield. It moved where it pleased, carrying with it the message of the divine or the demonic, as if it knew something they didn't. As you lie there, listening to the wind that still howls outside, you begin to wonder if the monks ever realized how little control they truly had. They had spent their lives attempting to control their environment, to purify the air they breathed, to cleanse their souls of sin. And yet, the wind, that constant, ever-moving force, remained beyond their reach. It came and went as it pleased, unaffected by their prayers, unaffected by their rituals. It was a force of nature, wild and untamable, a reminder that they were not in control of the world around them. Perhaps this is the lesson the monks never fully understood. No matter how hard they tried, they could not control the wind. It would not bend to their will. The air they breathed, the world they lived in, was not something they could master. In that realization, there is both humility and peace, because the wind is a reminder that we are all part of something larger, something greater than ourselves. We can pray, we can hope, but in the end, we are all at the mercy of forces we can neither see nor control. As the wind howls once again, you hear the monks' voices rise in prayer, their chants echoing through the corridors. There's desperation in their words now, urgency in their voices, as if they know that they are at the mercy of something much larger than their faith alone. Their prayers are not just for themselves, they are for the wind, too. They are hoping that it will carry their voices to heaven, that it will bring mercy, that it will lift the plague from their midst. But deep down, they know the wind may carry them to a different place entirely. The idea of divine judgment, carried on the wind, was both a fear and a comfort for the monks. It meant that they were not alone. It meant that God was watching, that He was present in the world, in every breeze and gust, in every shift of the air. But it also meant that they were vulnerable. They were at the mercy of forces beyond their understanding, beyond their control. And that was a difficult truth to face, especially when their lives and the lives of those they loved were at stake. You can't help but think that this struggle, the battle between faith and fear, between prayer and helplessness, is not just a thing of the past. It lives on in you too. You may not live in a monastery, you may not pray the same prayers, but you still find yourself, at times, at the mercy of forces you cannot control. The world shifts around you. You struggle to find meaning in it. You grasp for something to hold on to, something to guide you through the storm. And like the monks, you find that no matter how hard you try, you can't always control the wind. Yet in this realization, there is freedom. The wind moves as it chooses, not as you would have it. It doesn't answer to your prayers or your hopes, but it is there and it is constant. It is the breath of the earth, the breath of the divine, the breath of all things that move and change. And in that, there is peace. As you lie in your bed, listening to the wind that continues to swirl outside, you feel a sense of connection to the monks, to the world they inhabited, and to the world you live in now. The wind has always been a part of our lives, a part of the story we tell about ourselves. It carries our hopes, our fears, our prayers, our sins. It moves through us, shaping our lives, and yet it remains untamed, beyond our grasp. And perhaps that is the greatest gift the wind can offer, the reminder that no matter how much we try to control the world, there is always something greater, something beyond our understanding. The wind reminds us that we are all part of something larger, something that moves and changes with time. And no matter how hard we try, we can never truly hold it in our hands. We can only let it pass through us, let it carry us along, and trust that it will take us to where we need to go. By now, the wind has become something more than just a breeze or a storm. It is a living presence, You can almost feel it press against your chest, a constant companion that moves with purpose, shaping your every breath. The monks would have said that the wind knew your heart, that it could feel your soul's weight, and it moved in response to that. In their eyes, the wind wasn't simply a neutral force of nature. It was something spiritual, something sacred, something that could reveal the hidden truths of your heart. As you lie in your bed, listening to the wind's howls and sighs, you begin to understand that the monks' obsession with the wind was more than just superstition. It was a reflection of their deepest beliefs, their understanding of the world around them. To them, the wind was not something separate from life. It was an integral part of it. It carried with it the potential for both grace and destruction, and they prayed to understand it, to bend it to their will. But as the wind rages on, they realize that it is not a force to be controlled. It is a force to be respected, to be acknowledged, and ultimately, to be surrendered to. There's a certain freedom in that, isn't there? To recognize that the wind, like life itself, is beyond your control, beyond your grasp. No matter how much you try to hold on to it, no matter how many prayers you say, the wind will not be tamed. It will always move as it pleases, changing directions, carrying with it the messages of fate, of destiny, and sometimes of divine will. The monks, as devoted as they were, understood this. They understood that their prayers, no matter how fervent, could not change the nature of the wind. They could only hope that it would carry them toward salvation, that it would bring them the mercy they so desperately sought. And yet, there was always a part of them that feared what the wind might bring. The wind, after all, had brought the plague. It had carried the disease from one village to the next, sweeping across the land with no mercy, no warning. And for the monks, that was a constant reminder of the power the wind held. It was both a blessing and a curse, a force that could heal and destroy with equal ferocity. In their eyes, the wind was a symbol of the fragility of life itself. They knew that they, like all living things, were at the mercy of forces beyond their control. And yet, in the midst of that uncertainty, there was a strange kind of peace. The wind would not bend to their will, but it would always be there, a reminder that they were part of something greater than themselves. The air, the wind, was the breath of God, the breath of life itself, and it moved as it pleased. You lie there now in the silence of your room, and the wind seems to slow, as if it is waiting, listening for something. The storm has passed, and now there is only a soft murmur in the air. The monks, too, would have known this feeling. The wind was never predictable, never constant. It was as changeable as the seasons, as capricious as fate itself. But it was always there. It was a force that could not be ignored, a reminder that no matter how much we try to control the world around us, there is always something we cannot tame. For the monks, the wind became a symbol of surrender. They prayed, they fasted, they burned incense, and they hoped that the wind would bring them peace. But in the end, they knew that they could not control it. They had to surrender to it, to let it move as it would, and trust that it would take them to where they needed to go. They understood that the wind, like life, was a force of nature, both beautiful and terrifying, but ultimately beyond their control. And perhaps that's what the wind is telling us even now. We are not in control. We are not in charge of the forces that shape our lives, but we are part of something greater. We are part of the dance of the world, the ebb and flow of life and death, of grace and suffering. The wind moves through us, carrying with it the stories of the past and the promises of the future. It is the breath of the earth, the breath of life, and we are here to breathe it in, to feel it, to live through it. As you listen to the last whispers of the wind outside, you begin to understand that it is not just an external force. It is a reflection of your own inner journey. The wind moves through your life, carrying with it the lessons you need to learn, the things you must let go of, and the things you must embrace. And just as the monks did, you are left with the realization that, in the end, you are at the mercy of something much greater than yourself. The wind, like time itself, will not wait. It will not bend to your will. It will not answer to your prayers. But it will always be there, moving, shifting, carrying you along, whether you are ready or not. You've felt it now, haven't you? The wind, that silent force that has been with you all this time, moves differently. It's softer, slower, as if the very earth has drawn a breath and is holding it in. There's a strange calmness to it, like the world itself has paused, waiting for something. Perhaps for you to listen, perhaps for you to understand. The monks too would have felt this, a brief, fleeting peace in the midst of the chaos. The storm has passed, and now there's only the quiet murmur of the wind, the gentle reminder that things are always changing, always moving forward, even when it feels like everything is standing still. For the monks, this would have been a moment of reflection. The wind, though powerful and unpredictable, was also a source of revelation. It was the breath of God, the moving force of the divine. But in the stillness that followed the storm, the monks would have realized something profound. The wind, like their faith, was always present, even when it wasn't obvious. It was always there, beneath the surface, shaping the world around them, even when it seemed like the world had quieted. And now, in the stillness of your room, you realize that the wind isn't gone. It's simply shifted. It's no longer the force of destruction it once was. It's a reminder, gentle and subtle, of the passage of time, of change, and of the ever-present connection between all things. The wind that had once carried death, destruction, and judgment now feels like a breath of relief. It has moved from a message of fear to one of peace, reminding you that even in the darkest moments, there is always the possibility for transformation. In this quiet moment, the monks' lives, their prayers, their struggles, seem to come full circle. They prayed for deliverance, for the wind to bring them mercy. And in the end, it did. Not in the way they expected, not in the way they had hoped for, but in a way that brought them a deeper understanding. They learned that the wind, the air they breathed, was not just a force of nature. It was a reflection of their faith, their hopes, their fears, and their acceptance of the world as it was. They could not control the wind, but they could learn to live with it, to surrender to it, and in doing so, find peace. You, too, have learned something in this moment. You have learned that the wind, like life itself, is something that cannot be controlled. It will come, it will go, and it will carry with it the weight of all that is. But it is also a reminder that we are all part of something larger, something that moves through us, shaping us in ways we cannot always see. The wind moves, changes, and flows, just as our lives do. It is a constant companion, one that cannot be ignored, and yet it offers us the opportunity to grow, to change, and to find peace in the midst of uncertainty. The monks, in their prayers and rituals, sought to control the uncontrollable. They sought to purify the air, to cleanse their souls, and to bend the forces of nature to their will. But in the end, they learned that the wind, like faith, is not something to control. It is something to accept, to live with, and to find peace in. And as you lie there, listening to the soft murmur of the wind outside, you too find peace. The storm has passed, the wind has shifted, and all that remains is the quiet breath of life itself. Now, as the wind begins to fade into the night, you understand that it is not just the wind that moves, it is everything. The air, the earth, the world itself is in constant motion. Nothing is ever still. Nothing is ever certain. But in that movement, in that uncertainty, there is a kind of grace. The monks found peace in the wind, not by fighting it, but by surrendering to it. And now, you too find peace in the same way. The wind may never stop moving, and neither will you. Life will continue to shift, to change, to carry you in unexpected directions. But in the end, the wind will always be there, a reminder that no matter how much we try to control the world, there is always something greater, something beyond our understanding. And in that, there is peace. The wind, ever present, now seems to fade away into the soft rhythm of the night. It has carried its message, and the air has settled into a quiet calm. You feel the gentle hum of the world slowing down, as though everything around you is gently exhaling, allowing you to drift deeper into stillness. As the wind fades, so does the tension, and you're left with the peace that follows a storm. The weight of the day, the noise of the world, all seems to soften, melting away like the last lingering traces of a dream. It's as if the world is wrapping itself in a blanket of calm, and you are invited to rest in that quiet. Slowly, your thoughts begin to settle, one by one. The worries, the questions, the unsettled feelings, all of them begin to dissolve into the gentle ebb and flow of your breath. With each exhale, you release a little more, letting go of whatever might still be lingering in your mind. The world feels soft now, like a lullaby that you can't resist. In this space of calm, you are free to simply be. No more striving, no more questions, just the quiet, the breath, the gentle presence of the night surrounding you. It is time to let go, time to surrender to the peaceful embrace of sleep. As you close your eyes, you can feel the world quieting, the wind slowing, the whispers of the day becoming distant memories, and in that silence, you find rest, soft, warm, and inviting, like a slow drift into the peaceful embrace of sleep. Now, let your mind ease. Allow the quiet to wrap around you and dry. Tee into your dreams, where everything is calm and everything is still.